All right, hi class. Today's video is going to be an overview of Gatekeeper training to accompany the Isaacs reading. I'm going to try to keep this one a little bit shorter. I know I went kind of long in my last video, so I'll try to fix that for this one. So the main idea here is that we can prevent suicide by teaching people to recognize risk and respond appropriately. So there's a skill set that's needed to first recognize warning signs or risk factors of suicide, and then to respond appropriately to try to get those people into help. And those programs are collectively known as Gatekeeper trainings. The name's kind of self-evident here. It's the purpose is to train people to serve as a gateway into more formal treatment with a professional. So Gatekeeper trainings do not train you to manage suicide risk or anything like that. The primary purpose is to identify people who are at risk and get them into appropriate services. And these programs tend to target individuals who have frequent contact with the general public. So this could be, law enforcement. This could be EMTs. This could be even hairdressers and barbers, and folks like even Uber drivers. It's folks that tend to have fairly frequent contact with the general public, particularly those who have contact with the public in high stress situations. Again, like law enforcement, EMTs, folks like that. And so there are some core components to these that the Isaacs article discusses. First, preparing the participant, so introducing the tone, the norms, the expectations of the program, so getting them ready to engage with the material. The second is connecting. So this is attending to how an individual's attitudes and beliefs can impact the process of intervening with somebody who may be at risk. The third one's really key, and that's understanding. So developing knowledge and skills to recognize and respond to suicide risk. So the understanding part, and I guess the assisting part too, is really about the skill development. And again, it is kind of a skill to be able to talk to people in a way that's non-judgmental, that's non-threatening, and hopefully reduces the stigma attached to interventions for mental health, and particularly suicide. The next step is assisting, so helping participants to develop prevention skills through modeling and simulation. So in a typical in a good, I should say, Gatekeeper training, you don't just tell the participants what to do. You actually model that for them, and or you have them do things like role play so they can practice. So getting practice in a non-threatening situation, having them hear the words come out of their own mouth and having them try on their own language can be helpful in preparing them to intervene in a high stakes situation. So you want to have them practice in the low stakes situation, i.e. like in a class or in a training, so they feel more comfortable when if they're faced with a high stakes situation where they actually have to use that information. So that's an important part, and that's part of training in mental health work more generally. We do when we train our graduate students to do therapy and to do crisis intervention, we model that and we have them do role plays before we actually send them out to engage with actual clients. And then finally, networking. So part of being a gatekeeper is knowing where to send people. So a good suicide prevention gatekeeper training will give people those local resources that they can use and guidance on how to get them there. So who to call and how to make the call and what kinds of questions they should ask. So the big question here is do they work? Uh, as you saw in the Isaacs article, the evidence base isn't what I would call bulletproof, but the evidence does suggest that programs like this tend to improve knowledge and change attitude and impart skills. These gains aren't necessarily permanent. I had a couple of questions about, is it like a CPR course? Do you need to take booster sessions or get recertified every couple of years? There's not a lot of formal guidance in the more popular programs about how long a certification lasts. But in my experience, it is a good idea to periodically retake gatekeeper trainings to keep up your skills, because there is some evidence that these skills tend to erode over time, and your knowledge base about this erodes over time. So again, it does tend to change knowledge, attitudes, and important skills, but that may not be a permanent change. The evidence for reduction of in suicide attempts and deaths is there, but again, it's not as strong as we would hope it would be. So I'm sure the Isaacs paper talks about the Air Force program that did show some changes. So they are there, but it's more a lack of research than research that suggests they don't work. So there just hasn't been a lot of randomized control trials to demonstrate whether or not these programs are effective, and we really do need more of those. But again, those are pretty expensive to pull off. They require a lot of time and effort and money, and those things are not in great oversupply. So I really would like to see more of that work come out than what exists currently. So I want to just mention a couple of more common gatekeeper trainings. And so I've either participated or reviewed the curricula for each of these. The first one, and the one I like the best in terms of the curriculum and how thorough it is this first one. It's ASSIST, so Applied Suicide Intervention Skills Training. But it's also the one that is of these four most popular. It's the one that requires the most investment. I want to say that the course is 6 to 8 hours. Memory's a little hazy on that, but it is a longer one, but it is a more involved one that really takes a deeper dive than some of the other ones. It's a good logical curriculum that's laid out well, and if you have the opportunity to take one of these, this would be the one I would probably give the highest recommendation to, with the exception of mine, of course, which we will be doing next week. So I have a one that I created myself called Carpe Diem, and I will be training y'all. So all of you will receive gatekeeper training as part of this class. So, but if a couple of years down the line, you feel like your skills have eroded, you need a refresher. I would recommend taking any of these over nothing. But if you have your choice of one, ASSIST is probably the best one. QPR, I've been through several QPR trainings. So QPR is question, persuade, refer. The quality of QPR depends a lot on who's presenting it. So you can get a really good presenter and you could get a not so good presenter, and you'd have very different experiences. I do like the simplicity of QPR. It's 3 steps. It's pretty easy to remember. It's a shorter training. The ones I've been through range from 1 to 2 hours. It's not as deep a dive as something like ASSIST is, but it still has some quality information. And this is probably, I would say, the most common one, the one I see the most being offered in the community. So there's a fairly extensive network of QPR trainers, so they're able to provide this training with some regularity. They have a website, and you can actually go find QPR trainings through their website. Sources of Strength is a little bit older, and this is the one I'm least familiar with. I've only really reviewed some of the curriculum, so I don't have a lot to say about this because I feel like I'd be talking out of turn to have any kind of a strong opinion on this. It looks good. You know, I'm not sure. The reason QPR, one of its strengths is it has that built-in mnemonic device: question, persuade, refer. Those are the 3 steps that you're trained on. This doesn't benefit from that, but it is good material. There's some research to suggest that it does those things that we talked about, like improves knowledge, attitudes, and skills. So that one's a little bit more of an unknown for me, but it is fairly common, although I think probably it's less common now than it was 10 or 15 years ago. The last one I've also been through twice, and I hate to say it's probably my least favorite one, Safe Talk. So this is one that's really structured and really scripted, and there's a lot of videos, and the videos are, not to be too harsh, because again, I don't want to discourage anyone from doing these kinds of things. Videos are kind of cheesy, if I'm being completely honest here. It's a fairly lengthy training, 2.5 hours, but again, it just feels very, very, structure is good, and it keeps trainers adherent to the model, unlike QPR, which gives the trainers opportunities to kind of wander a little bit. But it's not, I don't find this one to be as engaging. It's a lot of passive learning. It's a lot of just sitting and listening. There's not, I don't recall there being a lot of role plays or a lot of modeling from the trainer. It's more like trainer reads a script, shows a video. Trainer reads a script, shows a video. The information is good. Again, it's not going to win any Academy Awards for acting, but, and again, don't want to be too harsh, but it probably is my least favorite of the 4 most popular. So now I'm going to get to some of your questions for this topic. Question 1: what does it take to be part of a Gatekeeper training program? Not much. It may take some initiative on your part if it's not something that's mandatory or required for some role that you play. Like I know in past years we've provided Gatekeeper trainings to the RAs, and that's I think that's been a real good thing that we've done. But you really just have to look out for when the program's being offered. So there's no special requirements to take part in particularly the trainings that I just mentioned. There's no prerequisites or things that you need to do beforehand. It's just a matter of finding one and signing up for it. Could law enforcement make the training mandatory to help officers better identify suicidal individuals? Yes, some law enforcement agencies do require their officers to get trained. Not all of them. There's no like state law that I'm aware of that requires officers to be trained. There's most commonly for law enforcement, there's de-escalation trainings. So identifying mental health crises, and instead of using force or something like that to control the situation, using de-escalation skills, and part of that can be suicide prevention training. How would gatekeepers handle someone with high risk of suicide who doesn't want any treatment or help? So this is important to remember. As a gatekeeper, the amount of control you have over the situation is limited. So there are situations, and even as a clinician, there are situations where if the person doesn't want it, that they have agency, it's their choice. I can call in mobile crisis, and through that mechanism, mobile crisis is in North Carolina is every county has a mobile crisis team, and if there's suicide risk, they send in a crisis counselor who does an assessment, and they can seek IVC, involuntary commitment. That's not preferable, but that is an option, and it's not just clinicians that can call mobile crisis. Anybody can call mobile crisis if they're worried about somebody. So that might be something that you can do, but at the same time, you're limited in your ability to make anybody do anything. So it's important to understand the limitations of these trainings, and that you're not necessarily going to be able to get people to help every single time, particularly if they don't want to, and particularly if you don't have a close relationship and have nowhere to follow up. Say you're an Uber driver and you're worried about a passenger, and the passenger says, screw you, I'm getting out here. There's not a whole lot you can do in response to that. The article mentioned that many of those who die by suicide come into contact with primary caregivers in the weeks before their death. Why is that? I don't have a real definitive answer for this one. I think it is a good question. My hunch is that in some cases, not all, maybe it's just coincidence, but in some cases it might be an attempt to reach out for help, even if it's a very subtle one. So we know that people with depression and anxiety and some other risk factors for suicide do tend to use medical care more frequently than people without those mental health issues. So that could be part of it. They're just likely they're more likely to use those medical services, or they may be reaching out for help. So those are my best educated guesses as to why that is. Article mentions the link, okay, this is the Air Force thing, leads to a reduction of risk, as well as reductions in homicide, family violence, and accidental deaths. Why did this suicide prevention training lead to some other associated reductions? Was it due to some other training methods in the study? No, I don't think it was. I think it leads to these other reductions in homicide, family violence, accidental death, because the risk factors for those things are the same as the risk factors for suicide. So this is an unintended positive consequence here. It could be the case that it likely is the case that those skills that are used to identify risk factors for suicide also identify people at risk for committing a homicide or engaging in violence, or some sort of accidental death, some sort of carelessness. So accidental deaths, they're accidental, but they're also associated with risky behaviors. And so things like substance use. So all of these things get wrapped up in the same set of risk factors. So I'm fairly confident that's why that happened. Okay, and last couple of slides here, or last couple of questions here. Why do clinicians and practitioners who are trained on suicide prevention seem to get mixed results? The article also mentions they only tend to be effective if they're complex and multifaceted. Yes, so it's not to use a cliche, but it does take a little bit of a village to make this work. If gatekeepers don't have effective services that they can funnel people into, then that's going to limit the effectiveness of the program in terms of suicide prevention. So it's important to remember that the intervention itself is only the first step. It's not the last step. What we really want people to do is get effective treatment that addresses the drivers of their suicidality. So why do they feel suicidal? And so without those resources, it's really hard to get an effective strategy for risk management and risk reduction. So, For example, here, as a student, you've got the counseling center, right? So you've got a pretty ready referral source that you could say, hey, I'm concerned about you. Why don't I walk you over to the counseling center so you can talk to someone? If after you graduate, that might be more complicated, because then you're probably going to have to navigate community mental health, and that can be a little bit labyrinthine, a little bit complicated. There's different numbers, there's different services, they may not be easy to navigate, and so getting everybody on the same page and making that process as smooth as possible is important if we're going to have effective suicide prevention. I like this question. In your opinion, what is the most important trait a gatekeeper could have? It's empathy. It's the ability to listen and to reflect with true empathy and understanding, and a desire to get the person in help. You can be a skilled conversationalist, you can know a lot, but if you don't have empathy, it's not, the conversations are not likely to go well. So that would be my pick for the single most important trait. It's not the only important trait, but it's what I think is the most important trait. Regarding suicide prevention programs, should they implement different strategies depending on the age group of the target audience? There's been a little bit of this. So the ones I mentioned as most common are meant for a general audience. They are not targeted, but there have been more targeted kinds of things on interventions. So for example, targeting veterans, targeting older folks, things like that, targeting kids. So there are specific suicide prevention and gatekeeper programs that are taught in schools. So yes, there is some of that. Are they more or less effective? I don't know that we have the evidence to state that definitively, that if you tailor your training for a particular group, that it's more effective for that group. That's not to say it's not, it's just to say I don't know that there's enough evidence to make that determination. What is keeping gatekeeper training out of communities the most, and what is the best way to change that? It's money, and it's expertise, and it's resources, and it's time, and it's all of those things that I kind of find it fun. I guess I find it it's kind of nice that I see a lot of questions that are like, why isn't this being done more? There's a lot of stuff that we could do that might make things better that just isn't being done. And generally it comes down to time and resources and expertise. You've got to get people to do the training. You've got to get people to show up for the training. And those things are not as easy to pull off as you might think they are. So I encourage you that if you feel like this, that you do something about it, that if this is a strong desire, that you become a trainer for suicide prevention and offer it in your community. Is gatekeeper training like a certification that can expire and needs to be taken again? I think I've already addressed this one. There's not necessarily technical expiration dates for training, but I do find it to be a good idea to get refreshers now and again, because there is evidence that the skills and knowledge erode over time, and you want to be able to keep that up. So while not technically an expiration date, it is a good idea. So all right, I kept it under 25 minutes at least this time. So I'm going to sign off for this video today, and I look forward to seeing y'all next week. Have a good one.